Hi, everyone. I, Asif Osmani, have the honor to be the team manager of the communities team at Standing Together and privileged to be part of the Faith and VAWG Coalition. Faith and VAWG Coalition is a partnership organization bringing together a range of organizations and activists working at the intersections of faith, race, ethnicity, and violence against women and girls. The coalition seeks to build on existing work to address VAWG by providing a more strategic, regular, structural approach to centering the experiences of survivors of faith in this work. Existing work to end domestic abuse at grassroots level is rich and diverse. However, the coalition acknowledges that barriers facing grassroots by and for organizations include funding restrictions, hierarchies, and ideological limitations in the donor sector. This has been problematic for moving towards a more diverse, inclusive, and community-grounded approach in the VAWG sector. I would like to welcome everyone joining us here today and truly excited to be listening, learning, and reflecting on this very pertinent theme for our webinar, Beginning a Journey of Decolonization from a Funder's Perspective. As a conversation starter in 2022, we organized our very first webinar, Practical Perspectives on Decolonization in the VAWG Sector. This first decolonization workshop focused mainly on understanding the academic perspective and how it's affecting by and for organizations in the UK as well as globally. Within our team here at the Faith and VAWG Coalition, we all agreed that although there have been some conversations around the issue, especially around the culture and the dynamics of funding, which over extended period has caused harm and created significant barriers within the VAWG sector. Therefore, in this webinar, we are creating a platform and a starter conversation for understanding the perspective of the funder and learning ways of challenging the traditional funding system to build positive steps that will help by and for organizations and accessing funding, and discuss how funders can take a step and build and foster more inclusive, equitable partnerships, and with an aim to change the traditional hegemonic attitudes. Our heartfelt thanks to you, Dr. Romena Ishrati, Honorary Research Associate SWAS, to Huda Jawad, who is one of our co-founders of the Faith and VAWG Coalition and member of the Anti-Racism Charter Working Group. We are also truly grateful to Nina George from Folk Foundation and Annabel Derling, Esme Fairbairn for their support, their willingness and humility in agreeing to be part of this significant discussion. I would also like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Nana Otto Oyorati, Executive Director at Forward, for chairing this webinar. We know how difficult it is for the by and for organizations juggling with all the workload, and we truly appreciate your time and for all your support to chair this webinar. Finally, I would also like to thank my sisters from the Faith and VAWG Coalition, Elsa and Zara, for their hard work and for putting this all together. Elsa has been proactively working on bringing us all together. Finally, should you wish to contact us, please do email us on hello@faithandvogue.org. Our social media handle is @faithandvogue. Now I wish to hand it over to Nana, requesting her esteemed company to commence this webinar with her guidance, sharing, facilitation, and insight. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Really lovely to meet you all. Welcome to this webinar, and I'm sure it's going to be an exciting time to listen to the journey of decolonization from a funder's perspective. I'm sure you'll all be listening carefully for some gems to drop today. So, my name is Nana Oyote. I'm the Executive Director of Forward, but today I'm excited to be your main host for this amazing webinar. Thanks to Wasifa and the team for putting this together. Just to get you warmed up, I'd like to ask you all to start to introduce yourselves in the chat function. Tell us how you're feeling this morning I think it's a little bit cloudy. We started sunny, but just tell us how you're feeling in one word, which city you're joining us from. Because I know that there are some of you from different parts. We are based in London, and it would be good to know where you are all coming from. Now, to some technical issues. Please note that the closed captions are available. So do click the CC icon on the panel bar at the bottom of your screen if you wish to do so. And again, if you are having technical issues, just press F5 to refresh your screen, and you will be back to the chat function, to the webinar. Would love to engage you whilst the presenters are presenting. So please use the group chat function to express yourself and tell us how you are, your views and things around the webinar. Please note also that Zara and Elsa, thank you very much, from the Faith and VAWG Consortium, are going to be responsible for monitoring the chat function and answering questions as we go along. Specific questions for the Q&A session should go in the Q&A section and not the chat function. So please note that. This is an exciting conversation, it's a new conversation, and I know that decolonization has been an issue since the days of COVID with Floyd and all the issues that have come up. And for us, we are all continuing the conversation, so it's a good opportunity. But I want you to bear in mind that all the speakers today come from a place of humility and not perfection. They are not claiming to be experts, but this is a journey that starts with open and honest discussions like we're going to have today, or you're going to hear today. So we may not be able to respond to all your questions, but we may spark and ignite some conversations and discussions that you would want to take forward and back to wherever you work. At the end of this webinar, we'd also like to encourage you to give us your feedback. So Zara would be coming back to share the link. So please don't rush off when you have ended, but we'd like to hear so much about what you think. So as we start the webinar today, these are the housekeeping reminders. And I'm really excited that we are starting this journey. And I hope you have started to share with us where you're coming from, your name, and what you do, and how you're feeling this morning. I'd like to take the opportunity to now share the first speaker and introduce her. The first speaker today will start off with a quick overview of decolonization in the perspective of the VAWG sector. Dr. Romina Israti is a lecturer and UKRI Future Leaders Fellow at the School of History, Religions and Philosophy at SOAS University of London. It's exciting to have Romina with us today. I've heard her speak, and she's amazing at really raising the issues and the discussions, particularly looking at it from an academic perspective. So, Romina, I'd like to welcome you on the floor, and I hope that we will be able to enjoy your amazing overview on the issues. You have 10 minutes, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Nana. This is too generous of an introduction. I have heard you speak and I'm inspired. It's an honor to be with you all. And as you said, this is a journey and we're all coming from a position of learning, I guess. So I'm going to share some of my learnings and hopefully these will resonate with others with us today. I'm going to share right now my slides, if you give me a second. And I do apologize. I will close my camera while I speak because I have a slightly unstable connection. So without further ado, thank you again for having me. It really is a pleasure and an honor. Sorry, let me just put this in presentation mode. Excellent. I wanted to start obviously with my positionality because the word decolonization can mean very different things to different people, and oftentimes we use it. we don't always define it, and it's not a new term. It's important that we acknowledge that it can be understood differently. And that is a function of multiple parameters, how we relate to the system of inequalities and power relations that exist and define our world. So it depends on our geography, our history, our socialization. About myself, I wanted to say that I'm Eastern European, so I've always sort of looked at the West sort of from the margins of Europe, and I've been quite critical about the dominance of Western representations of other countries within academia, within theory production, within knowledge. So I'm coming from a point of having worked for the past decade to de-Westernize and desecularize, in particular, international development theory and practice, so that responses to VAWG, violence against women and girls, domestic violence specifically that I look at, but also other gender abuses, can be done in a way that is religio-culturally sensitive, that is culturally embedded and in response to the sensibilities of different communities. So that is my primary concern and my primary work for the past 13 years now. Currently, I lead a project, Project Dildo, in East Africa and Europe. And in the context of that project, again, we're looking to develop systems through an innovative co-production model with partners in East Africa, being led by their knowledge in order to build religio-culturally sensitive responses to domestic violence. So working with theology, working with religious resources where appropriate and possible, but really being culturally appropriate, again, to have normative change. So I speak from that positionality. I'm not based within the VAWG sector per se, but I come from a field that is very much attuned to what happens to the VAWG sector in the UK. And currently we lead research. We're currently conducting research with migrant and ethnic minority religious communities in the UK to understand how their religious, cultural, linguistic differences are being catered within domestic violence services provision. So this conversation is very much at heart of our current work, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing what we know and learning from you. Now, the way I approach the system that I mentioned is it's an unequal system that we all talk about, but what does that mean? What does it comprise of? So I see it at three levels, really. At a theoretical level, in terms of the knowledge that we use, the theories that we use, the frameworks that we use in order to understand VAWG, domestic violence, gender-based violence, gender abuses. Generally and historically, the theory makers have been, as we say, northern countries, the global north, that comprise primarily of Western industrialized societies, who have controlled, academic knowledge thinking, and then that thinking is being mainstreamed through powerful organizations that again are dominated by northern countries. So we need to be aware that that knowledge has been embedded within colonial representations of the world, and then post-colonial representations that colonialism has ended, but coloniality, as decolonial theories have proposed, continues today. So those structural inequalities still continue. The other level is ideological and political. Again, we all know that the priorities we work around, the agendas as we call them, are very much dominated by the voices of those the wealthier countries, right? The countries that have more influence in the world, more power, and again, power is very much related to wealth. And then funding inequalities, that is the third leg of the stool, as I like to see it, that maintains those inequalities. Funding, so the structure of funding, due diligence expectations, right? That disadvantage organizations that don't have those processes in place, right? And various other expectations and norms that define that field, right? The field of funding and donors. So it could be the log frame that we all are aware with, the theory of change, results-based approaches to projects. Again, all that framework is very much informed by a Western sort of industrialized mindset, because most of the funders are based in that context. So I come to this from that perspective of, an unequal system, but I also want to say a few things about the VAWG sector specifically, and inform about, by larger critiques, decolonial and post-colonial critiques in general. There have been a few problematizations of the sector that we found, again, the theories and the concepts that we use within our practice, the way we define, let's say, domestic violence that I work with. Various different communities will define their experiences differently. And that diversity hasn't always been acknowledged because, again, the theory has been very much centralized. Also, there are problematizations as to whether VAWG responses across the world are actually responding to cultural diversity, religious sensibilities, diversity, the specific context of communities, because, again, those responses have tended to be quite technocratic, technoscientific, and very much, Eurocentric, as we call them within my fields. And of course, there is increasing problematization about how we provide services to clients who are diverse. Are providers equipped to engage with that linguistic, cultural, religious diversity? And how do we move towards that, a model or an approach that actually engages and embraces that diversity without being threatened by it? And of course, we know for example, from the Anti-Racism Charter, that there is a lot of problematizations around funding. And this is where we are going to, focus this session today. I'm really happy that we are, because funding is just so important in maintaining the system of inequality. So obviously there are disadvantages that, as I said, by and for grassroots organizations, community-led organizations and providers are facing vis-a-vis the mainstream providers. And that could be around the knowledge of funding, the due diligence processes, the procedures that they have in place, the policies, even the way they frame their projects. And I'm going to go to that shortly. But before I move to that point, I just want to make one more comment about this perception that the mainstream VAWG sector is a cultural. So oftentimes we hear that the white-led mainstream sector vis-a-vis grassroots or community-led organizations that are presented as cultural or culture-specific or as only relevant to their own communities that they cater to, right? But that actually is, again, it's a colonial mindset, incorrect and inaccurate mindset, because obviously the dominant mainstream sector is very much embedded in a Western industrialized culture, right? So it's very much informed by the experiences of the providers who make those organizations. They are not acultural, and this is where we can, by considering our own subjectivity. And so my suggestion and my own work really focuses on the idea that there isn't really an objective way of doing decolonization, but we should start by recognizing our subjectivity in our engagement with the world, with our clients, with survivors, and work around that subjectivity and the biases that come with it. The last time I had presented a few questions that we can reflect on as we move into this journey of decolonization. I'm not going to read them out loud. The slides will be made available. The first set of questions is around the theory and the knowledge that we use in the sector. The second set of questions is around organizational practice, the make of our own teams. Are we diverse enough? What do we mean by diversity? Who do we represent? And then the third questions are around funding. And this is my last slide, really. And I wanted to just start here before I finish. As we reflect on the problems of funding, what are some of the questions that we should be asking as funders, as organizations that work with funding bodies in the UK? So the first one is around the framing of the calls, the funding calls. Is there awareness of diversity in organizational profiles and approaches that, by and for organizations might have different needs, different conditions vis-a-vis the mainstream, more established, white-led, sort of dominant providers? How are by and for organizations identified in proposals? Are they equal collaborators? Are they co-producers? Or are they sort of data collectors or secondary or just implementers, but they don't get the credit and the acknowledgement that is due to them? And then where does funding come from? What kind of conditionalities are attached to that funding, right? What does that mean about the outputs and the sustainability of the project? Are funders interested in sustainability? Do they have mechanisms in place that allow for buying for organizations to request funding, follow-up funding, multi-year funding, and so on? And again, lastly, how do funders and donors engage with questions of diversity? Is there enough flexibility to allow for adaptation of our processes and practices to cater to that diversity? I'll stop here. Thank you so much, Nana. I'll pass the word to you, back to you, and please reach me at my email if you have any questions or thoughts or comments or learnings to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Romina. This is exciting to start us off with these conversations. Just reading the chat, a lot of people have been saying that they are feeling curious, they're excited, they're intrigued. you're feeling interested, and a lot of people coming from different places, even someone's from New Zealand, Germany, Mali, you know, London, outside London. Really exciting. And thank you so much for sparking us with these conversations, especially the questions that you finally left us with in terms of, you know, framing our thoughts and questions. And so these are things that we will share for participants, those who have just joined. We've asked you to tell us where you're coming from, your name, and how you're feeling today, this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are. I'd like to now introduce the next speaker. She's also going to continue the conversations and starting us off with, what does a decolonized funding system look like? And these are conversations that will help us all to continue to be intrigued and also spark us to really start to think and reflect. And we will continue these in the conversations with the funders. So Huda Jawad, I'm excited to introduce you. She is an intersectional Muslim feminist and former co-director of Musawa, an international non-governmental organization leading the global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family. She is amazing. She's also the co-founder of Faith and VAWG Coalition. And I'm excited that she's come back to the fold to share her thoughts on this exciting conversation. So welcome, Huda, and go ahead and share your thoughts on what does a decolonized funding system look like. Stay tuned and really enjoy these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. What an honor it is to be in your presence, and all my co-panelists. Welcome, everyone who's joined us from all parts of the world. How amazing that we have such a wonderful community of people interested in kind of doing this work together and learning together. I'm just going to share my slide so that we all, there we go. So I come to you with a few kind of learnings and conversations that we have had at the Anti-Racism Working Group that has been responsible for the Anti-Racism Charter. I am one of the co-founders of that group and a member. Today I will be kind of talking about what a decolonized funding system and partnerships look like from the perspective of the Anti-Racism Charter. But I thought it would be helpful first to kind of explain my position around colonization or decolonization. And really, it's about kind of thinking, for me, the opposite of what colonization means. So very often colonization and the current sort of white supremacist worldview has been informed by the use of resource to exert power and consolidate power and to compel people and have power over. And I wondered in my research around this work, is the idea about money and resource as a mode of healing rather than a mode of harm. And here I kind of rely on the work of Edgar Villanueva, who is some of the kind of sort of at the forefront of doing this work in America, but also has a great resonance for us here in the UK. So I kind of think about what if money could be used to heal us and heal the survivors that we work with. As we know, that the aim of colonization was to literally seek and exploit and extract resource, and in doing so causing harm and trauma, and amass and consolidate wealth, money and resources. And what if this money could be seen as medicine instead? What if we create a system with access to money and grants that does not reinforce and awaken these traumas, whether they're generational or experienced through systemic inequality or literally through class systems and exploitation? And it's a trauma that may be also felt in our psyche and on a cellular embodied level. Could we direct money where the harm is most felt so that we can heal instead of continuing to create and replicate bureaucracies and systems that only reinforce this power dynamic of the needy being helped by the one with resource? And so what does decolonization involve? Well, for me, it's and for the anti-racism working group, decolonization is a process with a role for everyone, including those who have harmed and who are instrumental in causing violence or have caused violence or inherited that kind of privilege that came with harm and violence. And so in this process, we give space for the hurt, and we grieve the hurt we have endured. We apologize for the hurt that we have caused. We listen to those that have been excluded and exploited by the system, because they possess the wisdom that we need to restore balance. And finally, we create a space where we kind of relate to each other and find alternative ways forward. But to get there, we have to acknowledge and delve deep into the harm and deconstruct the taken for granted systems and norms and processes and the ideas of grant making and funding in their kind of very basic level. So that's the first slide. And here again, I use a quote from Edgar Villanueva around understanding where colonization comes from. And he talks about the idea that colonization is based on this particular worldview that separates the individual from their environment, from nature, from their community, and sees that themselves as kind of in this binary of either me or the other. And so in this worldview, the boundaries of my body separate me from the rest of the universe. I'm on my own against the world, and this terrifies me. And so I try to control everything outside of myself, also known as the other. I fear the other. I must compete with the other. And in order to meet my needs, I always need to act in my self-interest, and I blame the other for everything that goes wrong. So this is literally a mindset that has informed so much of our world and the systems that are around us. We can see it in every aspect of life, including the way we live and how we separate ourselves away from nature, the way we relate to ourselves, and even the way we build our knowledge, separating mind from body, where we elevate the cerebral and the rational, where we separate ourselves from each other, with certain human beings being more valuable than others, or seen to serve a particular function or end, whether that's through the construction of gender, race, able bodies, and class. And the separation mindset separates and divides and then creates hierarchies and systems of ranking, where the less powerful are given and assigned lower power as you go down the rank. So we see this everywhere, but also in our civil society and in the women's sector specifically. This is why we have inequality in funding, in outcomes for survivors, in the way workers are supported or not, in the leadership that we have, and the way we kind of heal and harm the cause that we are working for. And I here draw your attention to the research by Rosa, funded by Esme Fairbairn, which is entitled Mapping the UK Women's and Girls Sector and its Funding. Where does the money go? It was published this year in April. And one of the kind of top line figures, which still astounds me to this day, whilst we have been worked in the sector for over 11 years, and been part of kind of someone who's tried to find resource and funding. Actually, in the year 2021, through the 360 giving platform, there were less than 2% of the total grants collected in that year were given to women and girls organizations. And so it just tells you, out of all the money that was amassed in the UK on this platform in 2021, only less than 2% went to women and girls organizations. But even if you break that down further, you kind of look at the research and say, okay, so what about by and for organizations? And lo and behold, there wasn't enough resource to look at the funding for by and for organizations. And I know that this is an aspiration for the next iteration of this research. But even here, when we're looking at funding and how the disparity and inequality in the system, we choose, again, we see that a Black and minoritized women's organization and work is invisibilized and is not researched enough. So that is a fundamental reason why the Anti-Racism Working Group for the women's sector was set up and put together the Anti-Racism Charter. So now I'll kind of move on to the Anti-Racism Working Group. And I won't say too much. All I do ask you is to go on the website at the bottom, endingracisminVAWG.org, to kind of have more details. But we are of the sector. We came together in June 2020 after George Floyd's murder in May. And we kind of organically came together without kind of having to sort of think about the formation, the structure, but we kind of have endured in the last sort of 3 years now, where we want to create a real space where we really think about decolonizing, in one word, the way in which the sector works. And we do this without any resource. We had funding for a year that ran out 3 years ago. And all of us that are involved in this work do it on top of everything else that we do. And we know that there is a lot to do. And we have had a huge number of challenges, but we continue to do the work, and we continue to feel that there is so much for everyone else to take part in. So what does the Anti-Racism Charter do? It sets out a vision for an anti-racist approach in the sector to turn action and accountability at the forefront of what we do in England and Wales. This is our website, and we have seven major priorities: funding, partnerships and collaboration, appropriation, representation and engagement, leadership and governance, and the last one is policy and influencing, and finally communications. So the charter sets out guidelines and actions against all of these 7 major priorities, because we feel that these are some of the fundamental pillars on which a racist, white supremacist, colonial system that the VAWG sector kind of not only sits on, but perpetuates. So we want to kind of work on these and turn them on their head. We definitely feel that the oppressive practices within our sector have been about appropriation, erasure, denial, and the lack of accountability. And these are not just perpetrated by white-led organizations, but can also happen in the by and for sector and within organizations. So what does colonized and racist behavior by white-led organization look like? And these are just some examples in relation to kind of funding. So taking funding designated for by and for organizations, so often the Home Office or the London Mayor or whatever would create a fund for Black and minoritized, and a white-led organization will think, oh yes, we run a project, so we fit in. Again, thinking about the separatist mindset and how that influences the behavior of these organizations. Taking the lead in partnership bids, especially when the buy and for sector has a long history of working in this area. For example, supporting women with no recourse to public funds, or working on FGM, or so-called honor-based violence, etc. That's very important. The severing of the relationship between buy and for organization with commissioners and others through partnership arrangements by white-led organizations who kind of end up speaking for and representing the buy and for organizations in consortiums or in partnerships. And then finally, a partnership arrangement does not give the generic white-led organization the right to speak and represent buy and for organizations, but it kind of claims that as the partner that has more power, money, influence, resource, staff in that kind of arrangement. So what does the Anti-Racism Charter expect from those who want to sign up to it to do in regards to funding? We expect true partnership in the VAWG sector between buy and for and Black and minoritized women's organizations and with white-led organizations that is characterized by meaningful collaboration. So it is not a tick box exercise. You don't bring in a Black and a buy and for organization at the last minute when you thought about the project. Actually, you co-create something. To achieve this, it's important for white-led organizations to be active in demonstrating a genuine commitment to equality and ending power imbalance through practice and policy, both in the way they think about working, but also in how they work is very important. White-led organizations must consider their position of privilege and the unequal position of buy and for organizations and the disproportionate impact that this kind of work ultimately has on survivors. And here I'd like to shout out the Co-Action Hub, that is a collaboration between Standing Together and the Asian Women's Resource Center, who have really taken this particular sort of bullet point and really tried to think about how do you create a partnership that restores power and equally distributes it. So I would urge you all to go and speak to Shubha and Fran to find out more. And then I'm nearing the end. Here are the steps to decolonize funding. What we need to do is commit to ensuring buy and for organizations are given equal access and opportunity to co-create and be equal partners. We need to develop transparent processes for the way in which select lead partnerships and equality and funding bids. We need to support a shared statement and a vision to funders and the government about what the needs of Black and buy and for Black and minoritized women's organizations need. And you can see that in chapter 4, in the page 4 in the Anti-Racism Charter. How do we ensure buy and for and Black and minoritized women's organization can lead funding bids? Well, here are some pointers. We can challenge the way organization identifies itself and attracts funding. I would urge you to follow the money, find out who and where it's going, and ensure transparency. And white-led organizations should think about not leading funding bids, but actually serving and being the ones that do all the work rather than lead on how to do and how to construct and organize and think about impact, etc. These are some pointers for white-led organizations. Move from performative action to transformative action. Understand that racism is structural, not about just kind of how many staff you have from various ethnic backgrounds and who's in your leadership team. Move from being an ally to coalition. Do work together, do the heavy lifting, and ground anti-racist work in concrete action that will address long-standing structural inequalities. And in the end, do remember that we are working in very complex environment. We've not done this work before, so we give ourselves permission to get it wrong. And always reach out to those who are around you, because they're probably doing the same thing and wanting to think about the same thing. And when we're doing this work, we presume our power, not our powerlessness. And we all have privilege to address. And white supremacy and patriarchy wants you to stop. Make sure you don't, and you take that brave step. Solidarity and respect to everyone doing this work and wants to do this work. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Huda, for widening the conversations and really exploring deep issues around the decolonization and what it means in the terms of money. I loved what you mentioned as money as medicine. Somebody mentioned that it's really about trauma healing and really taking us back to the need for trauma healing and really looking at what can be done differently. I love the anti-racism charter, which is a must for all of us to understand and really think through, but also find it exciting, all the conversations you've been sparking us on. And I can see people are really asking issues in the chat. Collaboration and partnership is so critical, and this is the only way that we can make change. Collaborating with people and organizations who have been most marginalized and who have most needs, and not just need, but also complex and multi-intersectional needs that need to be addressed, particularly within the sector of VAWG. But also, I love highlighting the issues pertaining to by and for organizations. And these conversations and learning is important as we go into the next conversations with funders. So I'm really excited that we have had so much to spark up our conversations. And it's now time to really start the conversations around how to work with funders who have started this journey. But I say before we start these conversations, I'll just give you a minute for those who have just, who want to sort of spark off some more conversations as we go along and as we prepare Annabelle and Nina to join our conversations. We'll come back in the next 2 minutes so you can stretch and have some coffee or have some exercises. We all need to do that as we all come from homes and sitting down and really need to stand up and have some kind of stretch. We are just also reminded that the closed captions are available. If you want to use them, you just click CC icon in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. And so please use them if you need to. But thanks again to Huda for continuing the conversations, and we look forward to starting the conversations with Annabelle and Nina in the next minute or two. Thank you. I suppose this is also the time to really mull some of the conversations that has just been started by Huda and Romina. So much has been shared, and these are conversations that we cannot just let go. We need to take it to organizations, continue the conversations, invite us to continue learning, and invite us all to be able to be part of the conversations that you're having in different spaces. So help us also to share the word. And thank you, ladies, for joining us today as we continue. Annabelle and Nina, I hope you're getting ready to join us now. So I'd like to welcome Annabelle and Nina into the next conversation. Let's hear it from funders who started the journey on decolonization. This is a very exciting time to talk about funding and funders. I have just come from a situation where I have not slept most of the night because I had to submit a proposal. So you can imagine I'm also in that. And so listening to Huda talk about the challenges for a number of us by and for organizations, when you have the CEO doing the main fundraising and being the lead in fundraising, it is a huge task. So it's exciting to hear new conversations and to see how things are being done differently. I'd like to introduce Annabel Delling, who works for Esme Fairbairn Foundation. She assesses applications across various social change issues with a particular focus on gender justice. She was previously the co-chair of the ACF network group covering violence against women and girls. And prior to joining the foundation, Annabel worked as a grant officer to help a London child. Really excited to have Annabel. I've known you for a number of years, and it's good to continue these conversations. Nina George is a program officer on psychological violence, coercive control, with the issues affecting women program at Oak Foundation. This is her first foray into the funders side of things. Her background is actually 25 years in the front line of supporting frontline work on domestic violence, from early days on volunteering in refuges through local authority posts, and latterly running programs for those doing harm and supporting others doing this work. Really exciting to see you both and to hear from your perspectives of different issues. I'd like to start, we have a series of questions, and the process for these conversations is I'll ask a question to the panelists, and then they would tell us a little bit about the issues. And then at the end, there will be opportunities for Q&A. So if you do have any questions, kindly put them in the chat, and our colleague Elsa and Zara would put this together and share with the panelists when we come to question time. So to spark us off, please, tell us a little bit about the history of your organization, starting with Annabel and then Nina.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a privilege to be amongst these amazing women today and to be part of this important conversation. So Esme Fairbairn Foundation was set up by Ian Fairbairn in 1961 in memory of his wife. And the history of the sorts of things, the sort of areas we've been funding in for all that time has been mostly sort of in a few different areas. So historically, we funded around the environment, and we funded around children and young people, around arts and creativity, around communities, and around injustice. And I suppose injustice is where a lot of my work sits. We give out around 40 to 45 million every year based on income gained from sort of investments that we have. Lots of complex ways that the money is invested that my colleagues on my finance team can explain better than I can. So that's kind of where we are now. We launched a new strategy in 2020 and we sort of had a refresh of that last year in 22. And I can speak more about sort of what those priorities are if that's helpful, or we may come on to that a bit later. I'll let Nina go now.
Thank you, Nana, and thank you, Annabel. It's really lovely to be here today. I can tell you a little bit about what I know from the history of Oak. We're just coming up for our 40th anniversary of being a foundation, and we're a family-run foundation. We're set up and run by a family, and it's a global foundation, so we have several different programs now. Some are geographical based, some are like thematic based, like human rights, environmental, housing and homelessness. And I work for the Issues Affecting Women program, which is one of the first programs that was set up by the Parkers. And our lead particularly is Yetta Parker, who's like the grandmother in the family now. And we're kind of welcoming the third generation in, so they will follow whatever is their interest. Some of them are following environment issues, and they might follow whatever sort of impassions them that they want to fund. So as I said, the Issues Affecting Women program, we're one of the oldest programs, and we really sort of the baby, as it were, of Yetta. And it was really her vision to have something around, as she said, issues affecting women. So that's what we do. And I joined the program 4 years ago. I have to look at my dates there because COVID just messed everything up. And that and menopause, I have no hope, I tell you. So I joined the program 4 years ago, particularly to look at what we would call coercive control and having more grants around that as part of our domestic violence work. Just as Yetta, that's what Yetta wished for. So that's what I do. I think that's okay for now. Is that okay, Nana?
Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Nina, for mentioning this issue about menopause. There is now hope because we have started the conversations. Just as we are starting conversations on decolonization, these silent issues are now coming on board. So there is a lot of hope. Yes, can I go to the second question, which is talking about historically, what is the nature of your funding and the areas that you fund, and also the targets? And it's really exciting that you all come from some kind of experience of family setup or family-led foundation. So it's quite interesting to see how your perspective may change from other funders. But yes, please tell us that. Maybe starting with Nina, you ended, so continue the conversations, and then Annabelle will come on. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we basically follow Yetta's original vision, which is particularly focusing on domestic violence, and she was particularly interested in intimate partner violence. We also have work on anti-trafficking, which also includes attention to labour exploitation as well, as kind of thinking in that field develops. We also have work around crisis, which we're looking at again at the moment because the crisis portfolio was really kind of sort of as a reaction to crises, but that's a bit of a complicated thing at the moment because sometimes the foundation as a whole will make some funding available. Sometimes it's just something that our program does. So we're trying to work out how best to do that right now. And then the other concept that my team brought to Oak, which was really about how the work gets done more than the actual work, is around movements and the power of movements and movement building. I mean, we could have a long conversation about how philanthropy understands movements or maybe doesn't understand them quite so well, but there's some sort of movement around that, about thinking about that. And then in the UK, we had conversations with partners. We've been funding since 2006 in the UK. So we're coming up for like nearly 20 years for some of our partners. We have newer partners who are like a year in as well. So we have quite a mixed bag. We have 21 partners in the UK. And I inherited a portfolio in 2019, and my previous colleague had done some work around thinking about what we wanted to focus on. We're calling it a strategy, but really it's like, what do you want to focus on in the UK? And two important things came out of that. One was to have more funding go to by and for Black and global majority women, because we saw that was a huge gap in the funding. But the other part of that was to have to find ways for Black and global majority women to be decision makers on resources. So one of the projects that we seed funded was Project Tallower, which is really doing that work and really kind of, what's the word? We're limited in Oak. We can't really reinvent stuff quite a lot. We work for a family, we work to their vision, we work with the systems that we have, but what we can do sometimes is put some funding towards things that will really change the way funding is working. And I think that's what happens with Project Tallower. Was there anything else in that question? Have I covered it enough for you, Nana?
I'm sure you'll bring it up in the other conversations.
Okay,
so
cool.
It's interesting you're talking about crisis issues and elements around intersectionality, which are things that we've all had to start to think about since COVID. And COVID was really our landmark in terms of really starting to think about these conversations, issues around power and movements, and the power of women, and also the power of the by and for organizations, and how we have increasingly starting to have voice in the sector and really appreciating more of what we do. Thanks for also sharing the work you do about, I would say, transformatory funding and funding that can amplify and really make those transformatory changes. But I say again, at the same time, there is also the fact that there is need to build on, you know, the silent ones who may not necessarily have that kind of power and might around these issues. So, Annabelle, tell us a little bit about your historically, what's the nature of your funding areas and the targets. And I'm sure things have also shifted even within your own portfolio. So love to hear from you on these issues.
Yes, thank you. So we have historically funded kind of work around women and girls, work around equalities for as long as I can remember, really. But I think the last sort of iteration of the strategy made it more clear that we wanted to really focus on gender, on sort of injustices based on gender, and the most so the reiteration published in July of last year made that really clear. We sort of drew out gender justice as a really clear sort of area of work that we wanted to focus on, even though historically we have sort of funded in those areas. I think it was important for that to be as clear as it was made. I mean, alongside that, within our injustice kind of priorities, we also have really clear priorities around racial justice and migrant justice. And I think what's been really good for us working in the team is that the strategy really aims to be able to take that intersectional lens. So we're really kind of looking at organisations that cross those three, you know, 2 or 3 of those kind of priorities. And I think trustees are really keen that we understand where organisations are coming from, what the barriers and what barriers they're facing because of their intersecting identities, and really try and understand how we can support those organisations better. We are a funder which wants to get its systems changed. So that's the way trustees want to fund, and that's the part of the sector that they really want to tackle. They I suppose they want to look at preventative work. They want to look upstream in terms of the systemic problems that keep happening again and again to people. Why are they happening? Can we sort of change those systems so that those problems are reduced? I mean, that means that, you know, in the kind of ecology of the sector, we are a funder which can fund you know, that systems change, that work that's driving forward new work. We're less able to fund the kind of service delivery work on the ground. We quite often fund organisations which are doing service delivery and then using that knowledge and expertise and that kind of understanding of their communities to then sort of advocate for them to different people and to sort of to try and change those systems with that kind of knowledge base that they have. Is there anything else I wanted to say? I'll probably wait for the next questions to go on to the next bits.
Thank you, Annabelle. Again, you also continue the conversation on intersectionality, and it's quite interesting. I know that when we met, it was a part of the Women and Girls and Equality program that you were leading on. And now that's really shaped now to more gender justice. Which is an equally critical part, looking at the intersectionality around race, migrant issues, gender violence, and related things. But really exciting that you have also mentioned work around prevention work and preventative work. That's also an area that needs urgent action. And that's something that is almost always missed when it comes to funding, because a lot of focus is also on, you know, provisioning, but we need to also really focus on prevention, and prevention really has to take a gendered lens. So I'm really glad that you brought in the issues of our prevention, but also excited about the issues around systemic changes and systemic issues, because without having those much needed structural and systemic changes, it really becomes very difficult for people. We are just picking up pieces all the time. I always talk about a training where we talk about drowning babies. You're just picking the babies that are drowning without necessarily looking at who is actually putting these babies in the pool, you know. So it's really about us really understanding these issues. So yes, this is something that we all need to sort of start to address when it comes to also funding and giving us more tools and issues to bring onto the table. So now I'd like to for you to, maybe you started these conversations, maybe you may deepen a little bit more around any changes in the past few years. Could you explain your funding journey in the past few years and why there's been a shift in your funding journey? it would be really exciting. So maybe Annabelle, you can start to tell us about what has brought about this shift in your funding journey in the past few years. Yeah.
Yes, of course. So I suppose we are, we aim to be a funder that is committed to social justice, and within that, we know that racial justice is a key element of that. And I think for years we have funded organisations which are by and for organisations, and we have benefited hugely from their expertise and their knowledge. And we've tried to be in listening mode and understand what those needs are and what those barriers are. But I think the change for us did come about with the murder of George Floyd, with the resurgence of Black Lives Matter. We started to look more deliberately at ourselves and more deliberately about our own power, our own privilege, our own position, and started to think more about what we could do, not just to fund organisations, but what was happening in terms of the barriers for other organisations to reach us, who was reaching us, who wasn't reaching us, who couldn't get to us, and just be a bit more thoughtful about our role, I suppose, and also to acknowledge that our role, as an organisation that has a lot of money, our role in anti-racism work, both as individuals, just and as an organisation, both in this and in our own actions as a funder and in who we're funding as well. And I think that was a change for us, and the conversations internally really changed. Trustees pushed us to think more about it. Those conversations really changed, and they've changed, and they've created a lot more things internally, a lot more working groups internally where we're trying to push each other more on these things. We've also sort of published our work on DEI on the website, and you can follow what we've been doing on that on our website. I think there's also something about making commitment to funding more Black and minoritized organisations. The other thing that's really important, I think, is that we've made it really clear that we want to fund work where communities most affected are leading the change. So we understand that user experience is really important, and actually it goes back to what some people have been saying about white-led organisations picking up work that is where the expertise isn't actually in those organisations, and sort of the partnerships not being equal. And I think we've been much more deliberate in terms of asking organisations about those partnerships, about the equity between partnerships, and asking more questions about that. We've been told for some years now that actually, the bid candy stuff that happens, the things where they take the expertise of the by and for led organisations and use it, and then don't they're not paying them equally, and all these things are really, really problematic and really causing really big problems for the by and for sector. And we don't want to be a part of that. We want organisations, we want white-led organisations to know that we're going to ask those questions and really interrogate whether they are the right people to lead, whether other organisations should lead, whether it should be more equal partnerships. So those are the things that we're doing in terms of, I think that's how we've sort of changed over the last few years. It's just to think about these things much more deliberately.
I really, really appreciate you sharing these thoughts around your shifting to more social justice. And I would also say, about a focus more on social change, because again, where change happens, I always say change should come from within. And if you are not within and you're working with, it may not necessarily bring about those much needed change. So really, change is really important. And I like your conversations around listening, being in a listening mode. And being in a listening mode really requires you coming down to the level of people so that you can hear from them effectively. George Floyd was clearly a turning point for many of us, many of our organizations. I think it was a global turning point. Some of us have known this all along, and suddenly the media and social media brought it all to our doorsteps and to our homes, even during COVID. So really excited that has also brought up more conversations around these issues. But I like the fact that you also shared the issue about the role of trustees who are vital in the process, because leadership is so critical, and trustees have a huge role. And this really requires having these conversations in higher spaces in order to really talk about these issues. Publishing your evidence research is key. And Huda shared some evidence around research. And I like the fact that you also publish your EDI position and issue. So that is really, really very critical. And most importantly for me, your conversations around intentionality and being deliberate about change is really what is necessary. So I'm glad the conversations have started. So let's hear from Nina also in talking about what has caused the shift in changes in the past few years. So if you can explain that funding journey as well.
Thanks, Nana. Well, my funding journey is kind of only the past few years. So, but I would say at this point that Oak is a family-led and run foundation. So we are not in the process of calling anything decolonisation or decolonizing. That's not where we are at. But I'm very lucky to work in an atmosphere where certain practices are okay. So, for example, my program, apart from kind of really understanding that, to building solidarity between sector people is also as important as funding those people. I inherited working for a program where they'd already thought about like having a values alignment with who we want to fund. So, that was always part of the journey. So we don't necessarily take cold calls, or if we do, we would see if it's somebody who, whatever they're doing, their values align with the way we wish to work, which is around, movement building, which is around, sharing power, all those kind of things. And if we made a decision that organization fitted with our values, then we would very often give core or unrestricted support. We do very little project stuff. Sometimes I do with the psychological violence if it is a set project, but mostly we try and give core support so that, you have a block of money and it contributes to what you're doing, and that's what you report on. We try, if funding relationships work, we try to enter into long-term relationships. So, for example, I mentioned in the UK, we have somebody who will in 2026 have been with us for 20 years. So we're not averse to kind of having long-term funding relationships with people. And I also came into a program where it was really important to listen to what our grantee partners, our partners were saying, and to have the strategy that took that into account. So I'm really happy for that to be part of the way we work. And one of the things we were able to do was to commit some funding to the anti-racism charter, because we saw it was really important to our grantee partners in the UK to have this as a starting point. And we were only able to give starting money, but I feel quite proud that we were able to kind of support that important work. And then I suppose the other sort of thing about power is really how I work personally and have come from the sector. So I really kind of be transparent about like what the wording is at Oak, how how you as a potential grantee partner might meet what we're working with. So that also is being clear when people don't meet the criteria that we have. So I bring that into my work. And also personally, I know that having been as part of a grantee partner before with Oak, before I worked for Oak, I kind of know how opaque these systems are, and how when you're in that system, you think, oh, this is very logical, this online form, and it's not. It's a nightmare. So what I do is like spend time talking people through, like, this is how you might fashion the application. This is what we're asking for in this part. This and the terrible budget form that we have, which when you fill all the sheets out, it actually, the final sheet fills out for you. But unless we talk you through that, you have no clue, because it is really like, what the hell is this in front of me? Excel sheet. And unless you're some kind of Excel witch, it doesn't go anywhere. So these are the kind of things that I take into my practice as well. And part of that is really sort of translating what those of you on the ground are doing in organizations that we fund or we might want to enter into a funding relationship with. Part of that is translating it into the family speak, so that the family know what that is. And that's been a very interesting journey, because I come from a sector like the domestic violence sector. We do actually have a lot of jargon that I never realized I was using. And then I came to work for the family and I thought, oh, no, I really need to kind of express this really differently. So I do see my role as that kind of translation role as well, for the times that we get with the family to kind of, bridge those gaps and, maybe not use quite so much jargon or jargon that they're not interested in, find other ways to say
insider outsider perspective and bringing those kind of insider perspectives into your role in OAK. I like the fact that you also mentioned that you're not naming it, but you're actually practicing it, which is also important because sometimes we shout it, and we've had situations where people have been shouting they're feminists, but in reality you ask yourself, are they feminists? So there's a lot of issues around how we shout, but it's very much around the values and what we do. And it's really good talking about the fact that the process had already started with your organization, and you inherited the values-based program. And I like the fact that there was a lot of attention on movement building, sharing power, and also excitingly unrestricted support for core, support, because core support is such a big issue and when it comes to funding and long-term relationships and long-term partnership and funding is so critical. But this issue about forms, I've had the experience today, but luckily the funder actually put in a comment. And can you really comment on the process and what you thought about the process? So I just hope that that's what we commented on becomes positive and used as part of their listening exercise. So it's really exciting. I've got a last question for you. And the question is really about really looking on the other side on by and for organizations. We understand that decolonization is all about challenging the funding system, but there are also areas the by and for specialist organizations can work on in order to also strengthen accountability. And I'm sure that being coming from the perspective of funders, you may have a few tips and criteria that you'd like to share with us, because I know quite a number of those who are listening and joining this webinar are from by and for organizations. So I will start with Annabelle, if you can tell us some of your insights on these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question, I do feel like funders need to change rather than specialist organizations, but I know that's going to take time. So I think it's a fair question to ask. What tips can we give them? I mean, I suppose in terms of accountability, it's not something that I don't think we're an accountability focused funder. We think about we want to be a flexible funder. We want to be a trust-based funder. We want, when people apply to us, we want you to tell us about what you've done. But I think it doesn't have to be, we sometimes talk about contribution rather than attribution. So we know that, movements work together. Nina's talking about movements. We understand that movements work together, and actually we really encourage that movement. So we really want to hear about your partnerships, how you're working with other people. You don't need to sort of say you've done something if it's been a part of a group sort of push on something. The other thing I would say is that we're really focusing on organizations where it's led by the people who have experienced the issue. So we really want to hear about your kind of the who you are, how you know the communities. But I suppose the other things are around, sometimes people talk to us about, it's really hard to put together a really beautiful sort of application. And we have quite a short expression of interest form to start with, which is only 300 words. And people say it's sometimes hard to craft a beautiful sort of piece of prose to get that across. And I just say, just be, just try and be authentic. That sounds a bit patronizing, but I don't really mean it in that way. I just think sometimes people think they need to have a slick fundraising sort of narrative to put through that, but we just want to hear about what you're genuinely doing. We just want to hear about who you're connecting with, who you're working with. I think a lot of applications that look at our website, they probably won't fit our criteria. So it's really important that when you look at our website, you have a really, really strong sense that you're going to fit our criteria, because we don't want to waste your time, to be honest. But I think if you do feel as though you fit, just tell us about who you are and what you're doing. We ran a pre-application webinar back in June, and I think that's a really good thing to watch before you put in an expression of interest. I think Zara might be able to pop that in the chat, the link to that webinar, because I think that was a really good way of thinking about what we're looking for when we assess applications. But I suppose the truth is that most organisations which apply to us won't be able to receive funding, because we give out about 200 grants a year across all of our different sectors of work. But I do think that telling us about who you're working with, trying to yeah, again, this sort of authenticity. Don't feel like you have to squeeze yourself to be something that we want you to be. Just sort of be yourselves, tell us what you're doing and who you're working with. And just, yeah, have a really close look at the website in terms of the sorts of funding we do. But as I say, you know, prevention of violence against women and girls is a key bit of our work now, and it's named as a, you know, a priority. So that's a really good thing sort of going forward.
Thank you so much, Annabelle, and sharing some of the tips about what we need to do as funders. You know, sometimes people are so desperate that they would want to shift everything to make it fit the funders' call and to ensure that they, you know, and sometimes technically it's really a waste of time if you have to sort of do that. I like the fact that you're saying that what you want to hear more is about people being authentic. For a lot of organizations and buying for, you'd find that they also don't have the specialisms, even in terms of research, to be able to present their issues. So yeah, this is something that we all will take away in terms of tips. Nina, you need to tell us now about your understanding about the challenging funding system, but also areas that the buying for specialist organizations can work on to strengthen accountability. Yeah.
Yeah, we had, when we were prepping for this webinar, we had a really interesting conversation, didn't we, about the word accountability and how actually, and I really, I'm like totally with you on this, Annabelle, that buying for organizations, you're already overly accountable in every single way. So it's really, actually, it's quite hard to sit here and go, yes, you just need to be a little bit more accountable. So yeah, it sits uneasy, but it's also, as Annabelle said, it's like it's the reality that funders don't change that quickly either, and that's really hard to sit here and say as well. But us, we don't do open calls. What we do when we're kind of working in a certain geography is we kind of ask our existing partners, who are the people that, you know, might fit, you know, knowing that you fit with our values, who are the other people that might fit. And that's how I got to find out about the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition. And it was just about to set up. And I think Esme, you were sorry, Annabelle, you were involved from Esme's point of view at that point as well. So there's pros and cons to that, but that is how we kind of craft a group eventually. So I don't have much advice because I just think it's really, really difficult. But the one thing I have noticed is that we think that to persuade someone, we need a weighty tome. And I am so guilty of this. When I used to write strategy for local government, I'd be like, I present them with a 120-page thing of beauty, and they'd be like, oh my God, we can't even start to read this. So my journey was always about, like, you know, edit. And I'd still say the same, that, you know, if you can work on editing so that it's like what you do, but really condensed versions of, I think that's helpful. That's all I can say on that one. I think that is helpful. Oh, and so I spoke to someone the other day, and she was saying that she runs it past her mum, and I thought that's brilliant. So that, you know, you can figure out if you haven't got too much jargon, if it's that kind of funder you're approaching. If it's a jargony kind of funder, then yeah, use their jargon. But if it's not, like our family, they would not respond well to that. So, you know, the whole thing, yeah, run it past, I don't know, your mom, your grandma, some other elder in your life who can just tell you this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. But that's not much. I'm sorry, that's kind of all I've got.
It's really common sense, isn't it? The use of jargon in the sector is so amazing. I know that somebody was asking here, what is buying for? So I do know that these are issues that we really talk about and really expect that everybody understands. Accountability is something that we all need to explore, but I think it also conversations that also funders also need to reflect on. So really, it's exciting that we have had true conversations, sharing your journeys. And Annabelle and Nina, thank you so much. But I think now I'm going to open up the conversations for Q&A from the floor, maybe about 10 minutes Q&A, yeah, from anybody. So Zara and Elsa, are there some exciting questions that are coming up that you want us to reflect on?
And I sent you a summary in your direct message.
You know, being a chair, you're never able to read all the questions.
Yeah, maybe the main ones.
Okay. Okay. One of that is, how do you advise us as potential grantees talk to you about racism and decolonizing funding? Yeah. Elsa, is that one of the questions? I can't really see all the, yeah. Oh, okay, let me see some more. Okay, questions here.
Yeah.
It says that in funding, we are encouraged by funders to evidence impacts. Can you tell us what happens once the funders receive the information on impact? Either Annabelle or Nina, you can respond to that.
Okay. Impact's a really interesting question. We need to understand, I suppose, when people apply to us, we do need to understand what you've been doing, what you feel your successes have been, and the things that you're kind of most proud of, I suppose, because trustees want to understand the potential for any sort of investment they make in the organisation. I always say that I'm really interested in how organisations know that they are making the difference that they want to make, because for me that's most interesting. So say you're working with survivors in a certain way, how do you know that you're working in the way that is successful? How do you know that you're getting the outcomes that you want as an organisation? I suppose that's for me what's most interesting. I quite often find that organisations, things will come out. We normally have an expression of interest, and then we can take that through to a phone call, and then sometimes in those phone calls things come out where they've had a really interesting conversation with a partner about this, or they've been able to change the way that the policy was written that's really going to impact a lot of people, and they sort of come out in the conversation. But those are the sort of things that actually, for us, because we're a systemic funder, that we're really interested in. So you change something that might affect a really wide range of people. Those are the kind of things that come out, and that we kind of then sort of talk to our trustees about. I think impact can be a really tricky question sometimes in terms of who defines what impact is, and I think we're really open to conversations about who gets to decide that, what that looks like for different organisations, and organisations which are situated differently and serving different communities. I think those are interesting conversations, and we're really open to hearing people's different views about it. In terms of when a grant's made and in terms of reporting, again, we want to understand how you know you've made progress. We're much more interested in your learning than we are about how many people came through the door. You know, we're much more interested in what happened, you know, your reflections, rather than the kind of the output kind of focus, I think.
Yes, Nina.
Just quickly, yeah, I think funders have been talking about this for a long time, and so have we in the sector, and I'm not sure there's an agreement on what that means. So at a very, very broad level, it's like, what did you think was a success and what have you learned? I mean, Oak at the moment, you know, what moves the family is kind of personal stories. So, you know, that's the thing that kind of you might have some numbers, but you show the personal stories, and then that kind of seems to carry some weight. So yeah, but it's that I know that's not how all funders work. So, you know, it can be difficult, and sometimes I wonder if funders know what impact actually means. So, you know, you tell them this is the impact we had despite the XY circumstances, you know.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, the issues around impact, because at the end of the day, sometimes a one-year program would not be able to sort of demonstrate much impact at all. And yet you're supposed to be demonstrating how you've used 1 year to make change. So I think these conversations need to be had. So it's really, really important. There's a question for Annabelle here, and it's from Huda. I'm glad you talked about Esme Feben asking white-led organizations about the anti-racist practice. At the Anti-Racism Working Group, we are worried about organizations using the charter to signal to funders their anti-racist credentials without actually doing anything around anti-racist charter ask. Do you have an advice on how to manage that, or is there something that funders can do to circumvent this tick box exercise?
Yeah,
Annabelle.
I think that's a really big problem, and I think, yeah, I can see a white-led organisation that is thinking, okay, this is a new hoop we need to jump through to prove that we're a thing, even if we're not the thing, and we're going to do it this way. I can see that's a problem. It's on funders to interrogate that. It's on funders to really be curious, really think about how it's working, and have conversations with all the partners, and you know, make it clear to white-led funders we want to speak to everybody involved in this, so that it's not just we're not just only having that relationship with the lead partner, if that's a white-led organisation. So we have conversations with all the different people involved. But if you've got advice about how for us to do that better, we're really interested in hearing from you, and really interested in doing this well and doing it effectively, because there's no point me just saying it if it doesn't do the job that we want it to do, which is improving equity between partners. So if people have got advice, I'm really happy to hear it, really grateful to hear it.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. And I think they've also said they're excited that you supported the anti-racist charter. It looks like we have very little time to have other questions. There's just one question here. Can I ask for specific or practical examples of how you may adapt to the conditions of by and for organizations and the potentially lack of processes or procedures or politics that a mainstream organization may already have in place, but a by and for organization might not, because of being newer or being limited by lack of time and conflicting priorities, for instance, around due diligence, expectations or output. So it's a lot of questions crammed in here, but it's specifically just asking for practical examples of how you may adapt your conditions of grantees for by and for organizations. Yeah, particularly those who are very small. Yeah. Yeah.
Who do you want to answer that one?
I think you can both have a go. Nina, maybe you may start. Oh, no.
We don't, sorry, we don't adapt our application processes. But what I'm doing at the moment is working on having a funding relationship with someone who's going to help us with our grant making, like an intermediary partner in the UK. And we have two people in partnership. One is Global Dialogue, the other is Project Hallower. And what we're trying to do is they have to report to Oak, and they have to apply through Oak's lengthy processes and due diligence. But what we're hoping to do is see if we can, what are Oak's needs, what are our partners' needs, what are their needs, so that we can craft application and reporting processes that are a lot easier, you know, but we're in the middle of that, so there's not much else to say around that. Just that I know it's a huge issue. I'm sorry.
But at least you've given advice on what you're doing to address some of that. Annabelle, do you have any thoughts? Just a minute on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but we're on a journey with it as well. So I think some of the things that we want to do that to benefit all applicants are around having an easier application process, you know, being a trust-based grant maker, being a flexible grant maker, so flexible reporting. You know, reporting requirements are really different now. So you can report using an annual report, for example, to try and reduce the capacity and resources needed to report to us. And we make mostly unrestricted funds, multi-year funding. I think the questions around by and for organisations are really important ones. And I think you know, the way that we work as a team now, we know that track record may look slightly different for kind of historically underfunded organisations. We know that they're going to look different, and I think we're sort of having more conversations and just really prioritising those organisations and really doing everything we can to sort of work with them, even if they don't look exactly as most of the funds organisations we've sort of historically funded. But I do think there is probably more to be done there, and I think we're having some really live conversations with trustees about, is there another way to support those organisations where there may be barriers in our funding that we create through our funding, there may be barriers they'd be hard to fund through our main programs. Is there another way that we can fund those organisations with a view to then sort of impacting the whole of our funding programme, but as a start to think about, is there another way we could fund those organisations? But it's one of those frustrating things about foundations. It's sort of those conversations are happening, but we're not ready to sort of put anything out there as yet. But we are, I suppose I want to reassure people that we are thinking about those things, and we're thinking about who's reaching our funding, who's not reaching our funding, and that being a problem.
Thank you so much. We are really excited that we have had amazing conversations, listening to Annabelle and Nina talking about the journey of funders and some of the things that have already sparked and the changes that they have made. We come to the end of this exciting webinar. I'd like to say thank you to the organizers, Asifa and her team, Zara and Elsa, and really grateful to the other presenters, Huda and Rumina, and really for your participation, the audience, and all that you have provided for us. At this time, I think Zara is going to put up the link to the evaluation so that you give us some feedback on how your thoughts about this journey and some of the things that we may need to sort of learn as we move forward. But this is a journey for all of us, and we hope that these conversations that have been started would continue. And I know that Annabelle and Nina have also had an amazing time sharing with us. We've heard from Huda exploring some of the issues, and Romina sharing her experiences around decolonizing from the VAWG perspective. So I'd like to say thank you to everybody. And Zara, can we give you the floor to share the links so that people can, or you've already shared it already? Let me know.
Yeah, that's all shared. It's in the chat.
It's all shared. So yes, thank you, everybody. Safe. If you're going to have lunch, enjoy your lunch, and hope that we will continue the conversations. Thank you, and bye-bye to everybody.
And thank you, Nana. Brilliant, brilliant chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.